land is your land, this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me.
Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to the 10th Right and Left Discussion Forum. Right and Left is a nonprofit company that was incorporated in Ohio in August of 2012 and is currently awaiting tax-exempt status from the IRS. Right and Left is a grassroots effort to promote civil discourse in politics. Our ultimate aim is to reduce the level of extreme partisanship that is crippling government at all levels. Our purpose is to work through voters to change the way we relate to each other. We will attempt to counter political intolerance that is encouraged by extremely biased talk radio, 24-hour cable news networks, and social media. Organizationally, we are patterned after Mothers Against Drunk Driving. As such, we are establishing and fine-tuning a chapter in Wadsworth, Ohio, to use as a template for replication in chapters in other communities. Each chapter will have an active presence in its community with a speakers bureau, a local access TV program, visibility at local events, an aggressive advertising campaign, and a fundraising effort. Additionally, we will have an interactive website promoting civil discourse with an endorsable belief statement, a regular newsletter, and a capacity for the exchange and dissemination of ideas. We plan a multimedia advertising effort that will use the lion's share of our budget. Our discussion forum is aimed at demonstrating that reasonable people with different political views can have reasonable discussions about contentious topics. Today's panel, beginning on my left, is Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist. On his left is Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Consultants and member of the Medina County Republican Executive Committee. On his left is Patty Haskins, retired math teacher at Wadsworth High School and member of the Wadsworth City Council. Today our panel will discuss immigration reform. As this program is being recorded, the U.S. Senate is waiting for a report from its immigration negotiating team, known to the news media as the Gang of Eight. The team is currently reviewing special interest input to help decide what to recommend to the whole Senate. One of its most contentious issues is the pathway to citizenship, or known by some as amnesty. Ron, as you know, some people are dead set against the idea of offering citizenship to individuals who entered the country illegally. What is your view?
Well, John, first of all, equating path to citizenship with amnesty seems to me intolerant. Amnesty really implies forgiveness without any penalty. Whereas path to citizenship is a path to citizenship with, certainly will have by any of the plans being discussed and should have fees, penalties, and requirements for that. The present path to amnesty, I did some looking up on that for the government websites, and it takes something like 10 years and may cost up to $10,000. Even to get just to get a green card is very difficult and is fairly expensive. I went through that just recently with a person that I know. So you wonder about the need for immigration, and the need for immigrants. Should we have them? And I think most people would say that there is some use. There's been a labor agreement recently for the low-cost transient labor. A couple of organizations have gotten together and said and disclosed how this would work and why that's good. Certainly, I read some statistics just recently. I took the opportunity this week to try to educate myself as opposed to just opinions on some of these things, and I have a few things here. Not only the low wage, but something like immigrants are 2 times more likely to start a business in this country than the native-born Americans. Mm-hmm. And in 2011, 28% of new businesses were started by immigrants, and they are 12.9% of the population, so inherently quite large, and it gave something like $775 billion to the U.S. economy. So immigrants are are and can be a positive force in the country. Now, penalties, fees, and requirements. Certainly, there's a balance has to be charged here. Now, if it's not very severe, then it is looked upon as amnesty, and probably is amnesty. But if it's too restrictive, then it cuts down on the pool, it cuts down on the incentive to become a legal resident. Some 11 million people at the moment, so I understand, are here in this country illegally. And in 1986, there was a reform. The way it was done, though, it eliminated about 4 to 5 million of those people, just because of the way it was written. So that's, at least in one author I read, said he thought that was the reason now for the upsurge in illegal immigration. Yeah. So there has to be a balance here. The administration wants to have a $500 fee or fine, and with a rather limited set of requirements. One of the ones I saw being bandied about is that have to have 56% of the people would not be able to meet the language requirements, the basic knowledge of English. I doubt if native-born people can read 56% of the language requirements. So I think there needs to be a balance. I think there is certainly a need for immigration reform. I think we could all agree on that. How we do it, what the aspects will be, or what has to be debated, and we have to remain tolerant about this.
We're going to circle around and touch on some of the things that you've brought up, but I wanted to make it clear in my own mind. You don't see illegal immigration as a roadblock to future citizenship.
I do not. I think that there has to be some accommodation here. I think the folks that are here on this in this status are making are and can make a positive contribution. Many of them, you'd realize, are mothers who stay at home to raise children. Not just in the labor force. So.
Bryan, I'm assuming you've got a slightly different take.
Slightly. I would agree that immigration is important to the vitality of our economy, the country. My contention is the illegal immigrant that comes in through the back door and establishes residency of some sort through an anchor child. The border states of Arizona, California, and Texas share a disproportionate cost of these particular individuals. The numbers that I saw were astounding as far as the cost in healthcare, education costs, the cost to the prison system. There just needs to be something done that takes away, removes the incentive for individuals to come into this country illegally. I don't believe, and I could stand corrected, there's any other developed country in the world that has as porous borders as we do. And I've had children spend a fair amount of time overseas, and if you get sick in Germany, they don't let you in the hospital unless you have the right papers. When you go to pick up your mail in Spain, the police have the right to ask you for your papers. And we don't have any of that here because we're so afraid to disenfranchise people or to profile people that we're almost chasing our tail around on this. We need to find a place to start. If people have been here, you referred to the act that took place back in 84. 86. Yeah. If they've been here 7 or 8 years, there needs to be a pathway, and that pathway should involve compliance with all the laws that are out there. There should be a penalty involved because they broke the law to get here, and I think that needs to be recognized.
But you're not in favor of deporting 11.1 million or whatever the number they're using?
No, I'm not in favor of that. I think there needs to be a pathway, though, for those people. We just can no longer afford, as a country, to turn a blind eye to this. We don't have $28 billion extra dollars to educate children in a ESL program. You know, English as a second language. One school system they refer to up in Connecticut has over 127 languages. How do we do that? There needs to be some
I have an idea
skin in the game.
I have an idea that is an exaggeration.
It could have been.
One school
but,
trying to teach
you know,
in 127. How would you like to do that, Patty?
You know, it was amazing. I mean, I thought it could have been a misprint. Most schools along the border are dealing with at least one language, if not two.
That's probably Danbury, Connecticut, where
It could
where
be.
I live.
It could have
They're
been.
really a very large,
Yeah.
high, diverse population in Danbury.
Yeah. So I'm for immigration, illegal immigration. There needs to be something done that's prudent to stop this this flow of people.
Patty?
It's interesting everything everyone has said. You know, the immigration issue, one thing I'm glad it's being discussed now. It's one of the few issues I've seen in the last 10 years where it appears that both sides, both political parties actually have a stake in trying to come to some type of reform that works for both. I mean, there are numerous concerns. As Bryan said, the borders are of concern. Now, in the past 5 years, actually the number of guards on the borders and so forth has increased, and they've actually been able to cut that down. I think it's something like 50% of the undocumented workers that are undocumented immigrants that are in the country are not here because they crossed the border illegally, but because they came on a green card or a visa, travel visa, student visa, and then
Okay, that's not part of the 11.1 million that we're talking about, though.
That is, I think.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, because they've overstayed. They've
Oh, I got
overstayed
it.
the length of time. They
Yes.
just stay in the country, they get a job here, yada, 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 never go back to their host country.
Yeah.
But that is a concern, and particularly for the border states, as Bryan said, they have more of a concern for that than we do. There has to be a concern, I'm sure, about jobs that are taken. I know that in the past, some of the immigration considerations were that the person coming had to have a skill that we did not have someone to occupy that spot here in the United States, so it had to be a skilled worker. However, now they're seeing that, and with that recent agreement that Ron alluded to between the AFL-CIO and the Chamber of Commerce, and they saw that there were many companies that employ migrant workers or seasonal workers, and United States citizens won't take those jobs, and they are dependent upon those workers, and that's why that deal was stuck. We do have to look for, I think, a pathway to citizenship, particularly for children of undocumented workers that are here, that they should have some pathway to go. Now, that pathway for them and their parents or anyone else does, I think, have to be legitimate. I don't think that we should just say, okay, they're all legal now and let's just give it to them. That's really not fair to everyone else that went through the process the right way. So that means getting in line. That means paying fees. One thing that wasn't mentioned was back taxes. That in many cases, some of these people have come into the country, worked here for 10 years, and never paid a penny in income tax. So that perhaps the back taxes need to be paid. Just
Well,
like
we're going to talk about that in a minute as it relates to the 1986 bill, where things got changed.
In regard to the ESL, you mentioned, I don't know if Danbury, Connecticut was the city you mentioned, but there is a large presence there. And there is also a very large effort of privately generated ESL volunteers. Volunteers. My wife, in fact, worked for a place they were called Literacy Volunteers, and she worked with students on an ESL basis and arranged this little or no cost to the student. All volunteer work. So I don't know if that would pick up the slack.
You know, in this area,
But it is
ESL is not primarily Spanish, it's other languages. We have many doctors in local hospitals who are not American born and their children are here. There are quite a few different languages being taught
Yes.
in ESL classes.
Yeah. I know that I was in grade school in a Catholic school after World War II, started school in 1945, and that we had an influx of, we called them displaced persons back then.
Yeah.
But these were people who were sponsored by members of our church. It was a Catholic school, and sponsored by members of our church, and they would go to our Catholic school. Well, the poor nuns of Sisters of Charity of St. Augustine really had their hands full trying to deal with, especially Italian and German, and trying to teach the kids. But they did. did a marvelous job, I thought.
ESL actually isn't involved in teaching anything in their language.
Yeah. Here are the things that I think we agree on and the things that we know for sure. First of all, no matter what the Gang of Eight comes up with, this country is not going to stand still for deporting 11 million people.
No.
They're just not. And when I think back to 1834, I believe, under Andrew Jackson, we relocated 5 tribes of Indians from the southeast out to the Oklahoma, I believe, and along what has famously become known as the Trail of Tears.
The Cherokees.
And there were the Cherokees and the Choctaws and the Creeks, and there were 5 tribes altogether.
Seminoles, I think, involved with that as well.
A lot of those got away to Florida and stayed there. But the fact is, though, that I don't think that we're going to withstand that kind of a smirch on our national personality. The other thing is that I don't think that we're going to allow 11 million people, undocumented workers, to stay in this country without health care and social services of some sort. I don't think we're going to tolerate that as a nation. I think this is something else we know for sure. We're never going to have an impenetrable border in the South. I don't care how high the fence is and how deep the wall goes and all of that, it's just not going to be.
And there's an incentive to come here. And I think also, and I think the administration's attitude is this as well, if you try to wait for border security, politically, this is not going to get done.
This is a thing, you know, I was listening to the Rick Perry, the governor of Texas, in an interview the other day. And I've heard others, the whole idea of securing the border is that political thing that gets tossed out all the time.
Right.
It makes whatever you say after that palatable to the electorate. You know, well, I would be in favor of this, but first we have to secure the border. And we're never going to secure the border.
But that's been one of the roadblocks that
it is, and it's
to
not.
any immigration so
and
far.
I think that's another one of the things that we know for sure, not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. The other thing that we know for sure is that a large part of the economy of the border states depend on immigrants. It depends on illegal immigrants. It depends on more immigrants that we're going to allow in under legal circumstances. But I wanted to get back to, we talked about the Simpson-Mazzoli Act for a second. And this was the act that was passed in 1986 that gets known as the Reagan Act now, but it was Simpson-Mazzoli. And it was an interesting thing about that act, that it applied to people who were had been in country and I think probably fully employed since 1982. So it was that there was that 4-year period of time that they were permitted in. But they were required to pay back taxes, confession of guilt, and a fine for their crime. And the other thing was that employers were given total accountability for the legal status of their employees. It was only in effect for a couple of weeks when all that changed. They decided, without a lot of fanfare, that they're not going to have to pay the back taxes. There was a part of the IRS code, 6093, some letter after that, that said that they would have to provide 3 years worth of income tax returns and so forth. Then Chuck Schumer, who was a representative at the time, and he was on the committee, who is now on the Gang of Eight, he had sent a letter to the Treasury Department advising them to, exempt the applicants for permanent residency from the need to provide the tax returns for those 3 years, which essentially eliminated that from the whole bill. Then they decided that, well, making the employer totally responsible for the legality of his employees, that was a little bit heavy-handed also. And decided that, well, as long as the employee provided paperwork that could reasonably be considered legitimate, then that the employer was off the hook. So what happened within weeks of passing the Immigration Act in 1986 was that the employer requirement to be responsible for the legality of his employees and the tax and the fine turned out to be $137. And that was it.
Isn't it still illegal, though, to hire an illegal immigrant?
It's probably illegal, but all you have to do as an employer is produce a reasonable fake document.
Okay.
And you're not really, as a matter of fact, there's a penalty for employers that are a little bit too aggressive in trying to nail down the legality of an immigrant.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's considered profiling of some sort. But in any event, now we're looking at the gang. I don't know what the Gang of Eight's going to come up with. I don't think anybody does at this time. But there's an awful lot of talk about, like Ron said, of having penalties, fines, back taxes, and all of that. Well, it didn't stick in 1986. As a matter of fact, I think that Chuck Schumer actually, his words were that it was never intended, the act was never intended to put that kind of a burden on the people making the application. Obviously, we could not have a successful legalization program if by submitting an application, an alien became vulnerable to an enforcement action by the IRS.
Well, you know, and along with that, Ron mentioned like up to $10,000. That's a lot of money for a poor immigrant.
Ain't gonna happen.
They're not going to have that.
Median income something like $36,000 a year.
So in other words, if you're rich enough, you could come in and buy yourself into citizenship.
really-
Well, they
we don't
could
want to see
pay that
that.
over a series of years.
Well, that's the argument for that.
You can't
A decade.
gut legislation once everybody feels good about it, and then say, well, we have all these exceptions. If you're here illegally, you need to recognize that, and whatever that pathway is, you need to adhere to it. Now, if you have someone that has been in our prison system for the last 5 years, and there is a disproportionate amount of illegal aliens that end up in our prison system, they have plenty of middle-of-the-road studies that have shown that, they should be deported. They're here illegally, they're in our prison system, there's no reason why we as a state or a federal government should be supporting them. We send them packing. If you continue to break the law as an illegal, there's no reason why deportation should not be an alternative. If you go, as I mentioned before, if you go to any other country, any other developed country, you go to Europe and you break the law, they're sending you home. And you have to have the strength of will to do that. There are plenty of legal residents that live and work in Germany and Spain, and they don't have voting rights. They pay taxes. They have sort of citizenship light. And that's another concern is the voting. We have illegal aliens that are registered to vote, and if you follow the current Jay Leno, recently picked up on the AP.
I heard that.
I won't mention that, but it's a problem that has grown to a proportion that we need to do something about it. We just cannot shoulder that financial responsibility anymore. It's in the billions of dollars.
Somebody says the path is going to have some speed bumps. We just have to figure out what they are.
Well, sure, yeah.
When you look at what happened in 1986, that act was considered to be a failure because what it was supposed to do was to stop illegal immigration. And what happened is that it ballooned from 3 million or so up to over 11 since 1986 because they took out the requirement for the employer and the taxes and fines and all that. What would be different now if we were to go ahead and have a pathway to citizenship that did not include fines and taxes, back taxes, and are we going to be right back where we were? I mean, my question is, are we? There is no acceptable solution to this problem. There is none. Everything has got something wrong with it.
Sure.
Right.
I mean, there isn't any way around.
It's true with any law I can think of, John.
The only, the only thing that I can think of that is that we're going to have to be content with the amount of illegal immigrants that the market can handle in this country. Maybe 11 million. Maybe we don't. The businesses that hire them don't need any more than 11 million. Maybe there are not more than 11 million jobs.
I think if we remove the incentive for people to come here, they'll start to go back. When you can't come here and have a child and not pay a dime to have that child, and then because that child's been born here, that they have automatic citizenship.
Well, that's the Constitution, though.
Yeah, they're considered
That's the Constitution.
anchor
Yeah.
babies,
Well,
and
yeah.
so we have that cost. So we have to do something to solve the problem that is charitable, that works towards our feeling of compassion for people, but you just can't allow 11 million plus to stay without any sort of consequence.
Yeah, but I don't want to see us get to the point where, like a European country, as you say, we refuse medical care to someone because they're illegal at,
I read my
That's what
horoscope
I'm
every day
and I wanna
just
go.
for fun.
Yeah.
And this morning it said, be tolerant in your blame and lavish in your praise. No saint is without a past and no sinner without a future.
Well, that's very, very good. This has gone way too quickly. This is a topic that would probably take a 2 or 3 sessions, but I want to thank you all. And that I want to thank people who joined us for this broadcast. And to learn more about Right and Left, please visit our temporary website at rightandleft.org. Or to become a volunteer or contribute to Right and Left or comment on today's discussion, please contact me, John Grom, at 330-336-2213. And we would like to leave you with this thought from Abraham Lincoln. America will never be destroyed from the outside. If we falter and lose our freedoms, it will be because we destroyed ourselves. Thank you for your time.